Hey everyone, welcome to this week's conversation with Dr. Stephen Nedd about the body and how to fix, protect, or maintain it using outside-the-box alternative solutions. If you're a big fan of the pharmaceutical or surgical approach, you are so in the wrong place, because on this podcast, we're not going to be pushing the conventional medicine methods or way of thinking about health. If you're looking for another way to live longer and healthier, join me, Ron Nedd, and my brother Dr. Stephen Nedd for this week's body chat about the flu. Me? I'm a retired Twin Cities chiropractor currently helping people buy and sell homes in the Tampa Bay and Los Angeles areas. My brother has a thriving chiropractic practice in the Clearwater area of Tampa Bay, Florida. In this podcast, we're going to chat about all sorts of topics related to health, nutrition, exercise, just about everything having to do with the body. You're invited to listen in to our body chat, but don't forget that neither of us is giving you health advice, so don't rush off to do something without either checking with your doctor first or seeing Dr. Stephen Nedd as a patient at his office. Please note that we did have some technical difficulties during the recording of this particular episode, so there are points where the audio quality is poor. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, Ron.
So let's get into this topic that a lot of people are suffering from these days and see if we can give them some information that will help them. What is the flu and how is it different from influenza?
Well, I'm actually going to start with influenza and then work back to the flu.
That's fine.
All right. So influenza is a virus that affects the respiratory system.
Mm-hmm.
So that would include your nose, your sinuses, throat, and possibly even the lungs.
Okay.
And your typical symptoms, especially this year's strain, include fever, chills, sore throat, runny, stuffy nose, muscle or body aches, headaches, and tiredness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the flu is actually one of two possible things. And it's actually short for influenza.
Right.
But there's also a stomach or intestinal flu that you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And that's typically associated with diarrhea, abdominal cramping. You can be nauseous, even vomiting, and sometimes you get a fever with that.
Right.
And you can get it either through direct contact with someone who's infected or by ingesting something that's contaminated like food or water.
All right, good. Now, what causes the flu symptoms that people experience?
Well, first of all, the flu is highly contagious, and you have to be exposed to it to get it. And that can occur through several means. And that is somebody can cough or sneeze, causing airborne droplets.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, each sneeze can cause 40,000 droplets to go into the air at over 200 miles an hour.
Wow.
Yeah. So you want to make sure that they cover their mouth or, with a Kleenex or with their sleeve. You can get it from skin to skin contact by just handshaking or hugging somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously from saliva, so kissing or sharing drinks is not a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also touch something that's contaminated like a blanket, doorknob, a phone, a keyboard, or a remote. And then what happens is then you take your fingers and it can be transferred to your eyes, your nose, or your mouth.
Right.
The flu, as far as being caused, it's caused by various viruses. There's 3 categories, A, B, and C.
Mm-hmm.
And the real true cause actually is weakness in an individual's immune system, allowing the virus to actually take hold.
Okay.
And just because you've been exposed to it doesn't mean that it will take hold.
Right.
So there's a really cool study that occurred in 2011 at the University of Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And they had 17 people that were actually injected with the flu.
Right.
Half of them got sick and the other half were perfectly fine. And all the participants actually had their immune responses confirmed by blood tests. And what they found was those that did not get sick had better immune responses.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's very contagious. And they found that it typically is contagious a day or so before you get the symptoms and until about 5 days after your symptoms begin.
Okay.
And it can be upwards in some people as long as 10 days after the symptoms begin, they can be contagious.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Now, what is the difference between the flu and a cold?
Well, there's 2 main differences. As far as the symptoms of the flu, they usually come on quickly within 3 to 6 hours.
Okay.
as opposed to a cold, which takes a little longer. And with the flu, it consists of usually you have a fever, sometimes chills and body aches. Headaches are common. You tend to get a dry, unproductive cough, as opposed to a productive cough with colds that are more hacking, and to extreme tiredness. So, as far as a cold, obviously it's less severe. You'll have typically a stuffy nose, sneezing, maybe a sore throat. And if you're tired, it's not quite as bad as the flu, and there's limited body aches.
All right. So if people out there are going through various different symptoms and they're not quite sure whether they've got the flu that's going around that everybody's getting or if they've got a cold, list out again the things that they can look at as far as being able to tell whether it's one or the other. I mean, they're not going to diagnose themselves, but if they just want to get an idea.
Well, they're caused by different viruses. And colds have over 200 different types of viruses that can cause it. But the main one is called a rhinovirus, and that causes over half of them. Yeah. As far as the flu, there's 3 types, A, B, and C. C is the least severe, and it doesn't cause the annual epidemics like types A and B. Okay. I actually have a chart that we can post.
Oh, good.
Really good that people can look at the various differences between cold and flu. But I can list these real quick if you like.
That would be great.
All right. So as far as fever, it's real rare in a cold, but it's usually present in the flu.
Okay.
That's one thing to look for. Body aches, usually you'll get those with the flu, and they can be severe. And if you do get them with a cold, they're usually very slight.
Okay.
Chills is very uncommon with colds, but is fairly common with the flu.
Okay.
Tiredness. Yeah, you can be tired with a cold. It's usually mild, but it's more severe when you have the flu.
Okay.
Coughing, the difference is with the flu, you'll tend to have a dry, unproductive cough, whereas with a cold, you'll have a hacking and productive cough.
Okay.
And sneezing is real common in the flu. It could be, it could happen in colds too. Sore throat tends to be more common in the cold, but the current flu has produced sore throat. So that's a tough one to discern.
Okay.
And a headache, typically you'll see that more in the flu, and it's more rare in a cold.
Right. Okay, good. That's a good list for people to have, and I'll make sure I get that from you so we can put a link to it. Why is there a different version of the flu each year?
Well, it's because there's different strains that are out there, and they circulate each year and can also change from person to person. Okay, so about 2/3, actually 69% of the flu this year is caused by a specific influenza A virus that's been around for about 50 years, and it's able to change quickly. And then most of the remainder are another type of A virus and various other B strains.
Okay.
And the flu activity this year actually began in the United States in October of 2017. And it picked up in early November, likely due to post-Halloween kids being sugared up on all the candy.
Yep.
And then it rose sharply in December, probably because of the holidays, more junk food and sugar and stuff.
Right.
And also less sunlight of the winter months. And it stayed high up to now, which is around mid-February.
Okay.
By the way, the swine flu strain of 2009, which caused the media to spread fear of a deadly epidemic potentially killing millions worldwide, never materialized into anything of note. And it was found to be far less dangerous than the regular seasonal flu.
Wow.
And that strain actually is one of the other A influenza viruses that is out this year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So we got rhino and pig viruses.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, going back to what I just talked about with that 2009 vaccine scare, there was a push for mandatory vaccinations.
Yeah, I remember.
Unfortunately, there were enough of us who became informed and aware of this, and we created petitions to successfully fight that. The health food store next to me had petitions. We had it at our office, and there were enough informed people that we were able to stop that. And it reminds us also of just a few years before that, in 2005, the same thing happened with the bird flu. And they projected that 2 million Americans would die. And do you remember how many actually died from that?
Don't remember that. How many were there?
0.
Of course. So will we ever learn whenever these things come out? It's like everybody come and line up for these shots that we're going to give you that are good for you because we don't want you to die. And it turns out that it was all bull. Anyway, we won't get into that. So how successful are these flu shots that everybody's recommended to get in preventing the flu?
Well, just this last week, the Centers for Disease Control reported that this year's flu vaccine was 36% successful overall through this flu season. Now, that's a rough estimate. It's probably much higher than the true number it actually is, so it's probably lower than that. It's 25% effective against that main A strain that we went over earlier.
Okay.
It's only 1 in 4 people that get it. It's actually working for them. In Canada, it's only 17% effective, and in Australia, it's only 10% effective. And the reason for that in Australia likely is because they only vaccinate the elderly and the people who are very unhealthy. So obviously the odds of them getting better or preventing it goes down significantly. By the way, in the United States, everyone over 6 months of age is recommended by the Federal Advisory Committee to get annual flu shots, and that's been going on since 2008.
I wonder whose money is going in whose pockets to have a recommendation like that come out.
Yeah. So getting back to the effectiveness of flu vaccines in general, there was 2 studies done in 2006. And they were analysis studies of many studies that were done before. The first one analyzed 64 studies and 40 years of flu vaccines being administered. And they found that there was little or no effectiveness in the elderly, which is 65 years and older. By the way, 3/4 of the flu deaths occur in that age group because they have weaker immune systems.
All right. So the group that has the most risk of dying from flu is the one that has the least result or the lowest result from the flu vaccine.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay.
And then there was another analysis of 51 studies where it went over 260,000 children under the age of 2. And they found that the flu vaccine was no more effective than a placebo, which would be like a sugar pill. Yeah.
Wow. All right. So then, in other words, not very effective.
No, and here's another interesting fact, and that is 35,000 people per year on average are reported to die of the flu. However, that number is deceptive because most of those people don't actually die of the flu, but rather from complications, especially pneumonia.
Okay.
So the true number is actually less than 1,000.
Oh, interesting.
And again, 3/4 of those are elderly.
Okay.
So in over 300 million people in the United States, less than 1,000 die of the flu every year.
Wow.
Yeah. The biggest problem with the flu vaccine is it's loaded with toxins. And these are additives which are supposed to increase the body's immune response to the vaccine. And they include toxic heavy metals like aluminum and mercury, ethylene glycol. You have any idea what that is?
No.
Antifreeze.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Phenol red indicator, which is what you use to check the pH in your pool or spa.
Okay.
Aborted fetal tissue.
Nice.
And antibiotics.
Okay. Well, that's
so there's over 40 that are known, and there's probably more than that.
That sounds like a witch's brew. It's like hemlock and eye of newt and aborted fetal tissue and a little bit of mercury. Stir it around and chant over it and then inject the person with it.
That's right.
Okay.
Mercury, which is found in these vaccines, tends to exceed the allowable amounts allowed by the Centers for Disease Control and the FDA unless the person weighs over 550 pounds.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not nice.
Yeah. There was also a study done in November of 2015 that showed vaccines that contain aluminum also were contaminated with lead. And that happens to be unsafe in the brains of children, even at the most minuscule level. So in other words, it's not acceptable at any level to have children with lead. And that's according to the World Health Organization. It will lower their IQ.
Right.
The lead was found in every sample tested in all the labs that produced commercial aluminum used in these vaccines.
Wow.
Yeah, not good. So one more thing I wanted to cover on this is that if you have the flu and you go to your medical doctor, a lot of times they will give you antiviral flu medications, not vaccines. And the 2 most common are Tamiflu and Relenza.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a study published in 2009 that found that these medications were inappropriate for healthy adults.
Ah.
Yeah, and the reason is because they only reduced the flu illness by half a day. So you're getting like 12 hours, of like, oh, I'm better now, 12 hours earlier than if I would have done nothing.
Wow.
Yeah. So people with diabetes or asthma, which are higher risk groups,
Mm-hmm.
What they found in the study was if they took Relenza, it only reduced the illness by just under 1 day. And if they took Tamiflu, it reduced the illness by only 3/4 of a day.
Yeah, that's not that much. It's not really worthwhile. Yeah, and it also explains with the inoculations and the flu vaccines why they really pushed from the pharmaceutical industry to get Congress to pass the legislation where basically they can't be held responsible for any problems that are caused by vaccines.
That's true.
So it's like, oh, there's lead in there? Kids are getting brain damage? Well, sorry, there's this legislation that says you can't sue us. Nice. Mm-hmm. I think I'd like to get some of that legislation myself. Anyway, all right. What are the best natural ways to fight the flu once you have it?
Okay. I want to start with a homeopathic called Flu Terminator. Mm-hmm. And I've been using this with incredible success for the last 20 years. And what's nice is you can use it at the onset or once the flu's taken hold. And it's actually worked well with this year's strain.
That's great. So you have tried it out this year and it's helped people out.
It has.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Does it have a little picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger on the bottle?
No, this is what it looks like.
Okay. Well, Flu Terminator.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And what else do you have that works well for flu?
Well, vitamin D3 is phenomenal. And according to Dr. Joseph Mercola, the best way to get D3 is through sun exposure. It's no surprise that the flu occurs mostly in the winter because of less sun exposure.
Right.
And he recommends very, very high doses once you have it. And we can also go over later about it as far as a preventive dose. But he says that you take about 1,000 international units per pound of body weight in one dose daily for 3 days. So, for example, if you weigh 100 pounds, then you take 100 times 1,000, which is 100,000 IUs a day in one dose.
Wow.
3 days. Yeah, if you weigh 200 pounds, you take 200,000 international units per day, once a day for 3 days. Now, we sell a bottle that has 900 drops in it.
Mm-hmm.
And each drop has 2,000 international units.
Oh, okay.
So 50 drops a day would be for somebody who has 100 pounds, and 100 drops a day would be for somebody who weighs 200 pounds.
Interesting. So during this year's flu season, have you tried that with any of the patients in the office?
I haven't, because I just got that information this past week when I was researching it.
Okay, good. Well, you'll have to update us in a later episode once you've had a chance to try that to see how that works.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. And what other natural ways to fight the flu are there?
Well, getting into fever now, I love sharing this one.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I recommend you take a liquid or powdered calcium, in particular calcium lactate or calcium gluconate, mm-hmm. and preferably with magnesium because they work better together.
Okay.
And you take that every 2 to 3 hours until the fever breaks.
So calcium, but preferably calcium magnesium combination drink. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Every couple of hours?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the reason for that is, well, what causes fever in the body? Why do you become feverish?
That's a very good question.
Okay, so fever is an immune response in the body. And what's actually happening is your muscles are warming up your bones to release calcium. And what the calcium then does is it triggers your white blood cells to fight the infection.
Very good.
Yeah, so it makes more sense to supplement with calcium than to lose bone mass when you're sick.
Okay, because then instead of having to release more calcium from the bones, your body's getting it by taking it internally, so it leaves the calcium in the bones.
Right, and then the fever breaks much, much faster. So I'm going to give you an example.
Okay.
So about a week and a half ago, I actually came down with the flu.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ironically, just before this episode.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And here's how it happened. Okay, so there was tons of people coming in with the flu. I even had a staff member that had the flu. So I was exposed to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did, the things I was supposed to do. I was taking my vitamin D. I wasn't taking this much, but I was taking about 2,000 IUs a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I did start on the flu terminator, but I had to go out of town for a seminar, and I didn't take my supplements with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I happened to stay in a motel next door to these kids that were up past 1 a.m. partying.
Mm-hmm.
And the door between them, believe it or not, had like a 2-inch gap.
Jeez.
So I was stuffing bath towels underneath there and everything. Well, it was just forget it. I did not sleep that night.
Okay.
So when I got home the following evening from the seminar, I started coming down with all the symptoms. And then when I woke up the next morning, the fever started to hit, and it got up as high as 101.5.
Wow.
So I load up on all my supplements, including taking the calcium magnesium every couple hours.
Mm-hmm.
And that following evening, my fever broke in the middle of the night, and I felt a whole lot better, and I was actually able to go to the work, and I didn't miss any work.
Okay, good. What are the best things you can do to avoid catching the flu? I think you talked about them earlier on, but maybe you can go over them again and make sure we have them all down pretty well.
Okay, well, there's quite a few things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
First thing is just use common sense. And that is, believe it or not, the current Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, recommends 3 C's, things that begin with C. First one is clean your hands frequently.
Mm-hmm.
Cover your mouth when you cough and sneeze to
Mm-hmm.
prevent airborne transmission. And then contain the germs. So that would be things like avoiding big crowds during flu season.
Mm-hmm.
If you know someone that has it, tell them to stay home while they're feverish and up to 24 hours after the fever subsides.
Okay.
If you have a big family, you want to isolate the toothbrushes and replace the head with a new one after getting well.
Right.
Also, in a family setting, wash the bath towels every 1 to 2 days, and also clean shared things like the TV remote with antibacterial wipes.
Mm-hmm.
That would also be smart if you're sharing computers to clean the keyboard and the mouse too.
Those are all good points.
Yeah. So in addition to that, I would recommend you reduce your sugar intake, in particular white sugar and fructose, specifically high fructose corn syrup, which we covered in the Sugar Blues episode.
Mm-hmm.
Sugar actually can shut down your immune system for hours at a time.
Wow.
So if you're exposed to it, then you have no defense.
Interesting. So you're saying it completely shuts down the immune system?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. Another thing would be to reduce your milk and ice cream intake. Sorry for being a party pooper, but those things tend to gum up your lymph system where your white blood cells circulate. And your white blood cells are your primary defense against infections, and they have to be able to move around freely. So if you're gumming up the lymph system, that's not good.
No. Okay.
The flu terminator is also excellent for prevention.
In what way?
So you would take 10 drops 1 to 2 times a day as opposed to the therapeutic dose, which is 10 drops 3 times a day.
But that would be something you do during flu season. It's not like a year-round thing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you would take half the amount for children.
All right.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah. And I want to get back into vitamin D3 again.
Mm-hmm.
According to Mercola, again, for prevention in children, they should take upwards of 2,000 international units a day.
Okay.
In adults, you should take a minimum of 5,000 IUs up to 10,000 based on your body weight. So let's say you weigh up to 150 pounds, then 5,000 would be about right. If you weigh 300 or more, then 10,000 would be about right for that.
Okay.
There's a great article on Mercola's website called Vitamin D is More Effective Than the Flu Vaccine, study says. And it just goes over why that is. And that's one thing we can post that's really good to read.
Okay, so we can put a link to that.
Yeah.
Good.
And one more thing about vitamin D that I learned by doing all this research is it also helps produce the neurotransmitter serotonin in the brain.
Mm.
Yeah, and when you combine vitamin D3 with L-tryptophan, the amino acid,
Mm-hmm.
as well as omega-3 fatty acids, which you can get from fish oil and flaxseed oil, it elevates the brain concentrations of serotonin without any side effects. Unlike the drugs that are used for that target serotonin, including Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, Celexa, and Lexapro.
Okay.
So that works as an amazing natural antidepressant.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before we end, is there anything else you'd like to share concerning the flu?
Yes. Just because you're vaccinated against the flu does not mean that you're immunized against it. Those are two totally different things.
Okay. Can you clarify that?
Well, vaccination means you get a shot with something that you're hoping is going to kick in your immune system to prevent an infection. Immunized means that you absolutely are 100% not going to get something.
Okay.
Yeah. So I can't tell you whether or not you should get the flu vaccine because that's your decision.
Mm-hmm.
But I do recommend that you take the time to weigh the pros and cons. And there's a lot of misinformation spread by the media as well as so-called experts concerning vaccinations, which doesn't necessarily include solid science behind it. And oftentimes it's based more on fear and scared tactics, as you know.
That's right.
So I'd like to leave everybody with a quote by an editor of one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, Marcia Angel of the New England Journal of Medicine.
Okay.
And she says, quote, "It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as an editor for the New England Journal of Medicine."
Wow.
Wow.
So much for the New England Journal of Medicine being a thing that you should pay attention to.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to cancel my subscription and get something like Reader's Digest or TV Guide. All right. Well, good. Thanks for sharing all that information. Hopefully for the people out there that are going through the flu and are not on the other side yet, this will be helpful to them. And this will be useful to people next year when the flu season comes around again. They should probably listen to it in sometime in October so that they're prepared for what's going to be going on, because we don't know what strain of the virus there will be. But all the information you went over is going to be useful to them to know and to apply at that point in time.
That's right. It doesn't matter what year it is. This is time-tested data.
That's correct. So it's very helpful information. And next week, we're going to be talking about artificial sweeteners. Pink, yellow, and blue aren't good for you. So we talked about sugar. We talked about some sweeteners that can be substitutes for sugar that are actually not going to kill you. Now we're going to take a look next week at the artificial sweeteners and what they actually have been found to do to the body and whether they're good for you or not. So that'll be next week. All right. Well, again, thank you, Steve. I appreciate all the time you put in to get this information put together for all the people out there, and hopefully they appreciate it. And if you listen to this podcast, you should let Dr. Nedd know if the information is helpful to you, because we like to get the feedback. Thanks again, Steve.
You're welcome.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Body Chat Podcast. We both really appreciate your time and your attention. We want to provide you with interesting and informative episodes each week, and if you have a topic you'd like us to cover or any questions you'd like us to answer, send an email to us at info@bodychatpodcast.com. That's info@bodychatpodcast.com. To make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Body Chat Podcast now on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or Spotify. See you next week.